I still remember the moment I saw him for the first time. His big brown eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly I felt as if my life had been rearranged without warning. 15 minutes later, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. When I walked into that cramped room at St. Catherine's Orphanage, I thought I was prepared. I had read every pamphlet, attended every orientation, even practiced rocking a cradle of blankets at home. But nothing could have braced me for the hush that fell when I picked him up. He weighed less than I expected, scrawny arms clinging tightly to my shirt, but he radiated a kind of fierce determination. His tiny fingers curled around my thumb as if staking a claim on my very soul. In that instant, I decided I will adopt this child no matter what it takes. The paperwork was only the beginning. Social workers sifted through my background, neighbors volunteered character references, and I spent evening after evening filling out forms that seemed never-ending. But all the while, he slept in my arms on the living room couch as though he understood that from now on, his fate and mine were inseparable. At night, I would whisper, "I promise you a home. I promise you love." And his soft coo seemed to say, "I trust you." For the first few weeks, the days blurred together in a mix of diapers, feedings, and lullabies. He was fushy, but only in the way that newborns are. He cried when hungry, calmed when rocked. I learned the sound of his sigh before sleep, the pattern of his yawns. Slowly, a routine formed: morning feedings, afternoons in the park, evenings of quiet cuddles. I dared to feel happy, dared to imagine the future. Around month 3, I started to notice odd things. When I tried to swaddle him, he'd pull his arms free too quickly, almost like reflex. He hated certain fabrics. Soft cotton seemed to irritate him. Scratchy fleece he tolerated. I chalked it up to newborn quirks. Then, at our 4th pediatric checkup, the nurse whispered to me, "Does he seem unusually alert? I feel like he notices everything." I brushed it off. All babies are curious, right? But her words gnawed at me. It wasn't until a stormy night in November that the first real hint appeared. I was rocking him by the window, thunder rattling the panes, when he suddenly stiffened. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on something outside. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, but he made a low, growling whimper. I had never heard that from him before. Heart pounding, I set him down gently and peered into the darkness. All I saw were raindrops racing down the glass. Late that night, as I changed his diaper, I noticed a faint bruise on his hip. It was patterned, almost deliberate, a small cluster of dark lines. Fear exploded in my chest. Where had that come from? I checked every inch of him, but found nothing else. I called the orphanage director the next morning, voice trembling, but she dismissed it as probably from a rough landing during playtime. She reminded me that transition stress manifests in physical ways. I wanted to believe her. Over the next week, I became a detective. I hovered as he slept, watching for any twitch or sign of distress. I asked his caregivers if anyone had lifted him too harshly. Everyone assured me he was fine. But I couldn't shake the bruise, the growl, the way his eyes seemed to see more than a baby should. One afternoon, at the playground, he climbed onto the slide, paused, and used his tiny hands to inspect the grooves as if studying machinery. A toddler fascinated by textures, I thought, until I recalled his earlier fabric aversions. He was sensitive to textures in a way that went beyond normal. I scheduled an appointment with a pediatric neurologist. My palms were sweaty as I cradled him in the waiting room. The doctor examined him with a series of gentle tests, reflex hammers, tracking lights, a soft brush along his skin to gauge sensation. He watched my son's reactions intently. Afterward, he pulled me aside. "I want to run a genetic panel," he said quietly. His tone was careful. He was trying not to alarm me. "There are markers I'd like to check, just in case." I agreed, though dread settled over me like concrete. The blood draw was excruciating for both of us. My son wailed in my arms, and I felt his pain as though it were my own. The technician whispered, "He's strong," and I managed a shaky nod. That night, I held him close, praying the tests would come back normal. When the results arrived, I was at work. My phone buzzed with an email from the neurologist's office. My heart raced as I read the subject line, "Genetic Testing Results." I stepped into an empty conference room to call back. "Mr. Carter," the doctor began gently, "your son's results show a variation in the SCN9A gene." He explained that this gene affects pain perception. Mutations can cause congenital insensitivity to pain or, conversely, extreme sensitivity to certain stimuli. I sank into a chair. My mind reeled. A child who didn't feel pain, how could he learn caution? Or one who felt excruciating pain at the slightest touch? The doctor suggested specialized care, a pediatric pain specialist, and recommended observing him closely for warning signs: unexplained bruises, reluctance to move, or flinching at odd times. Driving home, I rehearsed questions. How could I protect him? What would his future look like? I rehearsed reassurances. "We'll figure this out. I've got you." When I stepped through the door, he was banging blocks on the floor, giggling. He looked up at me with innocent joy, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. Over the next month, life became a balancing act. I learned to inspect his body daily for injuries he couldn't feel, to watch for sudden reactions. I wrapped corners with foam padding, kept the kitchen knives locked away, switched to soft, seamless clothing. But beyond the precautions, I discovered something else. My son felt emotions deeply. His tears were intense, his laughter rich. When he smiled, it was as if his entire being exhaled. That depth of feeling comforted me. I could rely on his expressions to understand his needs. At 6 months, we celebrated his first rolling over. He looked at me proudly, then paused, staring at his hands as if marveling at their purpose. I caught the moment on video, watched it back later, and saw a flash of something in his eyes: intelligence, curiosity, a knowing beyond his months. We moved to a house with a secure backyard so he could crawl safely. I painted the walls in pastel greens and blues, filled the shelves with sensory toys. Textured blocks, musical instruments, soft puppets. Every item was chosen to suit his unique perceptions. By his first birthday, he had a routine that suited him perfectly. Mornings began with a gentle massage, part sensory input, part bonding ritual, followed by oatmeal with mashed banana. We played peekaboo facing different fabrics so he could explore textures with his fingertips. Then story time, using board books with raised illustrations. Afternoons were for walks in the stroller down the tree-lined street where he could hear leaves rustle and birds chirp. In the evenings, I'd hold him close and hum lullabies until he drifted to sleep. And yet, I still felt like I was missing something. His behavior was extraordinary, but I couldn't pinpoint the core of his secret. Then, when he was just over a year old, he startled me by speaking his first clear words: "Mama." But instead of calling me when he wanted attention, he watched my face intently and said "Mama" in a tone that sounded questioning, almost inquisitive, like he was testing a hypothesis. Over the next days, he added "daddy" and "more" and "book," but always with that analytical lilt, as if he were cataloging vocabulary the way a scientist logs findings. I decided to record his milestones meticulously. I set up a camera to film his play sessions. Reviewing the footage, I noticed patterns. When I introduced a new toy, he would examine its edges with deliberate slowness, then tap it in a rhythmic sequence before engaging in play. During bath time, he'd submerge a rubber duck, count under his breath, then bring it up and drop it again. His curiosity was boundless and methodical. That was when the notion hit me. Perhaps his secret was not merely genetic sensitivity, but intellect. Perhaps, and I hesitated to say this out loud, perhaps he was extraordinarily gifted. But a 1-year-old prodigy, it sounded improbable. Still, I researched early signs of giftedness: advanced problem solving, unusual curiosity, intense focus. He ticked every box. I scheduled an appointment with a developmental psychologist. On the day of the assessment, he sat calmly, playing with puzzles. The psychologist administered tests designed for older toddlers. When the results came back, my jaw dropped. His cognitive age was closer to 3 than 1. He recognized shapes, colors, letters. He could stack blocks by number order, identify animals from silhouettes, and solve simple logic puzzles. The psychologist looked at me and said, "He's extraordinary. If supported properly, he could do remarkable things." I left that office feeling elated and terrified. My son's secret was out. He was a child genius. But what did that mean for us? I pictured a lonely life of expectations, pressure, endless enrichment classes. Yet I thought of his joy when discovering new textures, his analytical hum as he experimented. I knew he needed freedom as much as guidance. That evening, I sat on the floor with him, blocks strewn everywhere. He built a makeshift tower of 7 pieces, taller than him, then watched it sway and collapse with delight. He laughed and clapped. I joined him, and for a moment, I saw our path clearly. To nurture him, yes, but to let him be a child first. As I rocked him to sleep that night, I whispered, "You are perfect just as you are." He closed his eyes, content. I kissed his forehead, marveling at the secret he carried. A brilliant mind wrapped in a small body, waiting to change both our lives forever. He woke the next morning before the sun, his small body curled on my chest. The room was bathed in pale light, and I watched his chest rise and fall, marveling at every breath. Today, we had our first appointment with an early enrichment program, a trial designed for gifted toddlers. I dressed him in a soft cotton romper, buttoning each snap with care, aware of how sensitive he remained to certain fabrics. He reached up and tugged at my hair, a single firm tug that I felt as a sharp reminder. He was delicate, yet impossibly strong. In the waiting room, other parents eyed us curiously, their children clutching puzzles or tapping tablets. I felt self-conscious. Was I somehow flaunting his gifts or simply doing my duty? When our name was called, he strode into the assessment room confidently, head held high. The instructor introduced herself, then laid out an array of tasks, simple math games, pattern recognition, a tiny piano keyboard. He tackled each with unwavering focus, pausing only to tilt his head as if considering a problem from all angles before offering an answer. Afterward, the instructor pulled me aside. "He's beyond expectations," she said, eyes bright. "We can place him in our advanced track immediately." Advanced track. The words both thrilled and frightened me. What would that mean for a child who still needed help putting on shoes? I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat, and thanked her. Over the next weeks, our life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings at enrichment, afternoons at the playground under my watchful gaze, evenings of building and reading. I supplemented his classes with homemade experiments. We mixed baking soda and vinegar in a clear bowl and watched the fizz, then examined the bubbles under a magnifying glass. When I drew an invisible maze on paper, he traced it blindfolded, finding the exit with a grin. Each discovery illuminated his world and mine. Friends and family praised him as a little genius, but I worried about the pressure. I wanted to shield him from expectations, to let him be a child unburdened by labels. One afternoon, after a particularly long enrichment session, he fell asleep in the car on the way home. I carried him inside like a sleeping angel, heart clenching as I tucked him into his crib. His forehead felt hot. He stirred once, stretching his arms, but did not wake. I hovered at the door, listening to his soft breaths, grateful for his rest. That evening, I noticed he refused his favorite mashed peas. Instead, he pressed his lips together and stared at the bowl, brow furrowed. I offered him a spoonful of yogurt. He shook his head, then pointed to his mouth and said, "Too cold." The yogurt was room temperature. I realized he could feel temperatures in exact degrees, another facet of his uncanny sensitivity.
I heated the yogurt slightly, testing it myself, then offered it again. He tasted it, smiled, and finished the spoon. His world was calibrated in ways I could never fully comprehend. At bedtime, I rocked him in his chair, humming a lullaby. The gentle tune always soothed him, the vibrations through the rocking chair aligning with the rhythm of his breath. As he drifted off, I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and whispered, "You are unique, and that's your gift." His eyelids fluttered, and he smiled, then sank into sleep. Just as I felt we had adapted, a new challenge emerged. One morning, I found him with his finger trapped in a metal hinge of a cabinet door. He had been exploring the latch, pushing and pulling until he slipped his finger inside. I heard his whimper before I saw him, panic rising in my chest. I pried the door open, freeing his finger, which was reddened and swollen. He did not cry out as I expected, but his eyes watered and he turned away, clearly distressed. I cradled him, tears welling in my own eyes. It was a stark reminder that despite his intellect, he was still small, a child who trusted me to keep him safe. That same week, while at a friend's birthday party, he wandered into the backyard and climbed onto a low ledge. I rushed to him, heart pounding, just in time to catch him before he slipped. Looking down, he shrugged, as if the risk was trivial. I scooped him up, pressing him to my chest. The party guests cooed about his bravery. I saw it as another reminder of the balancing act I faced, how to foster his fearlessness without inviting harm. Meanwhile, the bruise on his hip, long dismissed, reappeared in a new location, a faint crescent above his knee. I realized that no amount of vigilance could erase every bump and bruise when he was so active. Instead of obsessing over each mark, I began documenting them. Photos, dates, notes on how he reacted. Knowledge became my armor. By 18 months, he spoke in full sentences, each word pronounced with precision. We played a game where I named an object in Russian or English and he translated. He delighted in the game, laughing when I purposely switched languages. One evening, after repeating my flawed pronunciation in a heavy accent, he corrected me, enunciating the word perfectly. I laughed until tears came. His corrections were matter-of-fact, no judgment, just the joy of mastering language. During a weekend getaway to the countryside, he chased butterflies in a meadow. I watched as he knelt to inspect their wings, uttering soft patterns of flutter flap, as if attempting to replicate the sound. I pulled out my phone and filmed him, the golden light of dusk framing his small profile. In that moment, I felt a deep peace. Despite the unknowns of his condition, this pure, unhurried curiosity was what I wanted to nurture above all. Yet questions remained. What would school look like? How to ensure he had friends who understood him? How to protect his emotional well-being when peers might see him as different? One night, I drafted a letter to a local elementary school's principal, outlining his needs and gifts, seeking a meeting. I waited anxiously for a response, knowing the way he was perceived there could shape his future. In the meantime, I connected with other parents of gifted children online. Their forums were full of advice, resources, and stories of both triumph and struggle. One mother wrote of her son's loneliness, another of burnout at age 10. I absorbed their experiences, determined to forge a path that combined challenge with compassion. I shared my own hesitations, and they offered a chorus of support. Balance is key. Encourage, but don't pressure. Celebrate the child, not just the achievements. Our first school visit arrived on a crisp spring morning. The principal greeted us warmly, guiding us through bright classrooms and a sensory garden designed for children with special needs. I watched my son's eyes widen at the colorful wind chimes and the tactile wall of woven fabrics. He ran his fingers across each strand, nodding thoughtfully. The principal knelt beside him and said, "This is a place where you can explore safely." He turned to me, eyes shining, and whispered, "I like it here." Relief flooded me. His first day of school was a whirlwind of introductions, teachers, aides, classmates offering shy hellos. I stayed for the first hour, watching him navigate the new environment. He settled at a puzzle station, assembling pieces with confident speed. A little girl approached, watching him. He stopped, looked at her, then offered a piece. She smiled, and together they completed the puzzle. I realized then that while his mind was extraordinary, his heart was gentle. He had the capacity for friendship that would anchor him. That evening, he tumbled into bed, exhausted but happy. I tucked him in and asked, "What was the best part of your day?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Learning, but also playing with friend." I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Tomorrow we'll find more learning and laughter." He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, completely at ease. Over the months, he flourished academically and socially. He tackled math problems designed for children twice his age, and in the sandbox, he built elaborate structures with other toddlers, explaining his designs in earnest detail. At home, our experiments grew more complex. We built a simple circuit with a battery and a light bulb, and he watched enraptured as the filament glowed. He asked if we could make it blink. I smiled and added a switch, and together we created a blinking light, a tiny masterpiece.
Through it all, the secret that had once loomed so large became a part of our story, woven into the tapestry of everyday life. His sensitivity to pain meant I was always vigilant, but it also meant he experienced joy more intensely. His intellect demanded stimulation, but it also gifted him the wonder of discovery. And above all, his capacity to love and trust reminded me why I had chosen adoption in the first place. As his second birthday approached, I organized a small celebration in our backyard. Balloons drifted in the afternoon breeze, and a banner read, "To our brilliant boy." Friends and family gathered, each bringing a small gift, a colorful book, a wooden puzzle, a knitted blanket. He tore open the wrapping paper with delight, examining each gift as he unwrapped it, expressing gratitude in careful, heartfelt words. "Thank you, Grandma. Thank you, Uncle Alex." Later, as the sun dipped low, I scooped him into my arms and carried him to the swing. He giggled as I pushed him gently, higher and higher, the wind lifting his hair. He looked at me, eyes gleaming. "Happy birthday, my love," I whispered, kissing his cheek. He closed his eyes, wind on his face, and sighed blissfully. In that moment, I saw my future laid out before us. Years of questions and answers, challenges and victories, routines and surprises. But most of all, I saw love, steady, unwavering, a promise kept. And I knew, without doubt, that adopting him had changed my life, just as his secret had enriched it. He was my son, unique, brilliant, and perfect, and together we would continue to discover the wonders of his extraordinary world.